Ariel Garten, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, David. It's fantastic to be here.
Well, it's fantastic to have you here. You're the inventor of Muse, the brain sensing headband, which actually, thanks to you, I've got a demo model here just so that people on YouTube will see what it looks like. So easy on, easy off. And I've been enjoying using it for several weeks now. But before we get into that, maybe you can take us through your pre-Muse career, if you will. For example, where did you go to school? What did you major in? What did you see yourself doing down the line, etc.?
Sure. So my pre-Muse career probably starts way back in childhood. I was always fascinated with the world and how it worked and how we perceive and understand things. And I was also fascinated to make stuff, make physical stuff that allowed us to have experiences of the world. Mm-hmm. In high school, I excelled in sciences and I worked in research labs. And I also was the lead in the school play and was really fascinated by both the artistic side of the world, how we express ourselves as humans, and the scientific and technical side of the world, how stuff really works from a molecular level. I went to the University of Toronto as an undergrad, majored in neuroscience. Actually, there was no neuroscience program at that point, so it was a hybrid that I put together of biology and psychology. And then as I was graduating, they finally created a neuroscience program that I was able to fold into. And at the same time, ran an art gallery out of my home and had a clothing line that I sold to stores across North America and was always creating experiences. After university, I went on to open a clothing store and had a line that I sold across North America, and at the same time continued working in neuroscience research labs. I worked in neurogenesis and Parkinson's disease, and then ultimately began my training as a psychotherapist in Gestalt, CBT, and NLP. Trying to find ways to marry the way that we understand ourselves in the world, and making tangible stuff that allows us to have experiences in it.
Yeah, what a perfect background for everything that you've done. For example, you were in plays, you were interested in drama, and in your career, you've presented to huge crowds. Evidently, you've done a lot of presenting, I gather, in your capacity as the head of the company. How do you say the company that makes Muse? I don't know how to say that word.
So our company name was Interaxon. As we sat down and said, okay, we are going to create a company that is about interacting with the brain, we came up with a super nerdy name, Interaxon. Axons that communicate with one another. It has a double entendre to interaction.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Great. I'm big on double entendre, shrink wrap radio, as you know.
I love it.
Yeah, that was certainly one. So did you grow up in Canada as well? Are you Canadian?
I did. I grew up right in downtown Toronto. And in my background, my mom's an artist. So from her, I got this understanding that you can imagine anything you want and bring it to life. And my father's in real estate. So from him, I got the deep business background.
Yeah, really. Really. What a combo. And was the art that you were selling your own art or your mom's art? Or
it was both my art and lots of other Canadian artists. So I created gallery spaces where people could come and create and share. Because I was always really fascinated by how we turn a lens on ourselves and create experiences that help us understand what it is to be human, these funny edges that we have as humans.
Yeah. So part of your preparation for the work that you're doing now was that you did research in neuroscience, and you mentioned some of the subject areas. Are you continuing to do any research in your, I gather you're on the board of Interaxon now. You had been CEO, and then I found an article that said you stepped down from that.
I stepped down when I got pregnant, so I stepped down for maternity leave, and somebody else very competent took my place as CEO. And my role now actually is evangelist. So I'm the chief evangelist, and I get to do what I absolutely love doing, which is teaching people about their brain and helping them fulfill the mission of really understanding that the place inside our head doesn't need to be a scary place, that the negative thoughts that we have, the negative experiences inside our own brain don't need to hold us back from being fully engaged in who we are and in our lives.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you come to develop Muse? Are you the inventor of Muse, or how would you characterize your role in, I know you're the founder of Interaxon.
Yeah, so myself and my two co-founders, Chris and Trevor, I began working in a research lab with Dr. Steve Mann in the early 2000s. I started to become very interested in brainwaves as something that carried both real technical information about the self, as well as a sort of noumenal artistic experience. So Steve Mann is one of the individuals who's credited as the father of wearable computing, and he had an early brain-computer interface that he'd built at MIT in the 90s. And in 2002, 2003, we started to create concerts where people could make music with their mind. So you'd have a single EEG lead on the back of your head, and by simply calming, you would increase your alpha waves, and we would use that as a signal to then start to change the world around you. And the first thing we did was we made concerts where 48 people at a time could modulate sound with their brain. And I stood back from this and I said, oh my God, this is phenomenal. Not only are we able to have this really emotional experience of ourself, but we're literally also controlling and interacting with the world directly with our brain. This is the first time we're able to put a window into the mind, so to speak, and actually have a direct connection with the brain that I never experienced with anything before. Yeah. And so that became the beginning of this journey to create Muse. Yes.
And you mentioned alpha, and I've wondered about the Muse device. Is that, just so that our listeners and viewers have some understanding, there's some options as to the sound that you can be controlling, sound feedback that you can be controlling with your brain. And the one that I find I like best is the rainstorm, and controlling the weather that way. And so I've wondered, is that indicating that when I am able to quiet the weather, am I in an alpha state, if you will?
So we no longer use the very simple band power approach to the brain. So back in the early 2000s, we were very simply looking at change in power of alpha or power of beta. And power of alpha indicating a focused relaxation, power of beta indicating a cognitively processing focus or cognitive activity. And so we created a range of installations based on that. But as we've become significantly more sophisticated in bringing Muse out to the world, Muse doesn't simply look at alpha, beta. It looks at a broad range of your own personal EEG characteristics. So we now have over 5 million sessions of meditation with Muse, and from that have created a very sophisticated algorithm that knows specifically when a user is in focused attention versus when their mind is wandering. So it takes into account all aspects of your brain activity at that moment. What's happening at the 4 different sensor points. There's 2 sensors frontal, 2 sensors temporal. What your existing data history looks like, and your full spectrum of EEG activity at the time.
So how can I know, if I'm from Missouri and I'm distrustful, how can I know that it's working, that it's measuring something real?
So lots of different ways. One, put it on and do the test for yourself. If you're focused on a single object like your breath, does it seem to quiet? When your mind wanders and you start to think about different things, you will hear the wind or the rain pick up. So in most cases, it works quite effectively. People's brains are complex, so it doesn't work 100% of the time, but it's a pretty darn good guide. And the second way is the vast body of research that's been done with Muse. So Muse is for those of you who aren't seeing the video or hearing, it's a 4-channel EEG that just slips on very easily. And we have 200 different research institutions that use it in a wide variety of ways. Some of them are using our meditation application specifically, like the Mayo Clinic that uses it with breast cancer patients awaiting surgery. They're given a Muse 4 weeks prior to surgery and for 2 weeks after to demonstrate a decrease in the stress in the cancer care process. Other people are just taking it as a clinical grade EEG, and there have been lots of studies that have been done demonstrating its efficacy next to a gold standard EEG like a biosemi or Activision.
That's amazing that for around $200 you can get a really capable EEG machine.
Yeah,
I
it's
have,
only 4 channels, so I mean you're
yeah,
losing a lot in the fidelity over the
okay,
entire range of the head.
right.
However, what you get in the trade-off is something that you can now use on dozens of people. I mean, we've had studies. Baycrest did a study with 500 participants in it over the course of a night, and we're able to find interesting characteristics in the EEG that have never been seen before,
Hmm.
because you can now do EEG neuroscience in situ, and you can do it across broad swaths of the population.
Well, tell us some of the interesting things that have emerged from that.
Um, So, in the Baycrest study that was published in PLOS One, they were able to see speed of learning effects. So, they were able to see how quickly somebody could learn to modulate their EEG activity or modulate their focus. In a study that we published with McMaster University, we were able to look at about 5,000 samples from our data set and see the change in EEG over age. So, alpha peak frequency is a fairly reliable marker of brain age. It's been demonstrated in a number of previously published papers, but nobody's actually been able to see the resolution of that change over time. And because we have hundreds of thousands of users, we're able to see literally decade by decade the decrement in alpha peak frequency. So you could see
Wow, that
somebody in their 20s have an alpha frequency of, say, 10.5. I'm just picking a relatively random number. And it goes down decade by decade by decade till you're in your 70s, your 80s, and you're down at, 7, 6 and change. Again,
that
the
probably
numbers in their
answers
paper.
one of the questions. That probably speaks to one of the questions I was going to ask you. Was I was feeling good about myself, thought I was doing really well, and then I put it on my 12-year-old granddaughter, and for a 10-minute session, and she had zero. What do you? I've forgotten the term you used.
Recoveries, maybe?
Yeah, zero recoveries, 100 birds, and birds have hearing issues, so I don't hear the birds. But she had 100 birds, zero recoveries, and something like 2,000 points, attention points.
Wow.
Which, yeah, it blew me away. It's like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore, which is not a good meditative.
That's not the goal. The goal is not to compare yourself with others. It's a personal journey.
Yeah, it's hard to, as a male, as a high achiever, it's hard to unhook from that achievement
Mm-hmm.
motivation. And I contacted your tech support people, in fact, and said, well, how come, there's a graph that you can see of your session to see sort of what your brain waves look like, and a bit of interpretation. But I said, where's the graph over time so that I can see that I'm getting better? And they said, well, that doesn't exist because we're checking we're setting the base. Your baseline is going to vary
Yeah,
from session to session. And
exactly.
so that's why. So was that the right information? I can't watch my personal growth over time?
So your brain is different every day, and in each session you do a calibration that tests where your brain is at. So you're always looking at how that session was relative to where you came in. However, over time, people do see a significant improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So for anybody who's never used Muse before, we should maybe back up for a moment and describe
Sure.
that the experience of using Muse. So you
Yeah.
slip on the headband, and you're actually getting real-time feedback on your meditation. So you know when you're in focused attention and when your mind is wandering. And the metaphor we use is your mind is like the weather. So when you're thinking, distracted, your brain's bouncing all over the place, you hear it as stormy or rainy. And as you come to quiet, focused attention, you then quiet those winds or rains or storm. So it's
Okay.
this really easy feedback experience. Am I wandering? Can I bring it back? After your meditation, you also get a graph that shows you what your brain was doing at every moment in your meditation. And you get something called birds. So if you're super focused, if you're able to maintain that focus for a period of time, you hear a little bird tweet on your shoulder.
Wouldn't the
And
birds be distracting and pull you out of that state?
that's part of it. So birds are actually there in some way to undermine the reward architecture. So there's a motivational architecture that goes along with this where you get points and rewards to encourage you and keep you moving forward for those like you who are motivated by succeeding. But this goal-oriented architecture is also a little bit antithetical to the goal of meditation, which is to let go of all of this. So
Yeah.
over time, you move from this extrinsic reward to the intrinsic reward of what am I experiencing? I'm feeling better. I like doing this for me, not for the reward. And we have birds there as a thing that shows you. So you're like, I'm doing great. I get a bird. And then as soon as you get excited that you have a bird, the bird flies away.
Yeah. Right.
And so you learn to be equally as equanimitous about your rewards as you do your failures.
Okay, I understand that. Now, just to fill out the picture a little bit more, the way that the person is getting this feedback is through a smartphone. In my case, it's the iPhone. Does it also work with Android phones?
It certainly does. So it works on iPhone and all newer Android devices.
Okay. So I'm hearing this auditory feedback that we've been talking about is coming from my iPhone.
Yes.
And I do it with the earbuds, AirPods that I'm wearing right now, whatever they're called, earpods.
AirPods. Yes. You look awesome in them.
Yeah. And, but also I discovered with my granddaughter, we were having trouble hooking it up with the AirPods and they kept falling out of her ears. And so I discovered accidentally that, oh, you don't need to have any kind of headphones on. You just let it play through the speaker, and that worked fine. And,
absolutely.
And that way I could kind of share in her experience, because since I was in the room, I could kind of hear how she was doing. So that was interesting to me.
Those are some of the most beautiful experiences I've had when you can just turn on the volume and literally be inside somebody's mind and hear where they're focused and hear where they're wandering. And, as a therapist, and as a parent or a grandparent, you try to get closer and closer to those people around you. And this is this amazing, beautiful metaphor for literally being inside their own mind.
Yeah, that's a nice way to think about it. You're a mother. Have you used these with your children?
My little boy just turned 2. So
it's a little early still.
Yeah, he's too small to fit the headband on.
Okay.
Typically, people start using it with their kids around 6 or 7, depending on the size of the head. We say that it fits from age 13 and up, but people have often had success with younger children fitting it as well.
Okay. Yeah, the headband is somewhat adjustable, I discovered. So, but it worked on our 12-year-old, but we couldn't get it all to work on the 10-year-old. So
a little more frontal lobe development, and she's going to be there. He or she will be there soon.
Yeah. I assume you've done some testing, and all the research that you have tested it with longtime meditators to see how it compares with their experience of meditation. Do they find that it takes them to the same place or what?
So the device is used broadly both by novices, people who've never meditated before, to learn how to meditate, and by experts who use it depending on how they feel in their practice. Some people use it just to track their meditation. Other people use it, if you have an expert meditator for the first time putting it on, they're usually quite amazed to get this real-time feedback and have a new lens with which to see their own mind. As meditators, we're consciousness explorers, always discovering new ways to understand our attention and hone that.
Yeah.
Some people will do it for like a 5-minute meditation prior to another type of meditation that they like in order to get themselves right into the zone. It is important to note that the algorithm was built specifically with focused attention on the breath. So it doesn't work with it won't work with walking meditation, for example. It works in scenarios where somebody's seated, focusing on a specific object. Yes,
and that's always been my meditation of preference, is the following of the breath. So that certainly works for me. I wondered if it I was thinking, well, maybe I should think of this as training wheels for becoming a meditator, for learning to meditate. And in my own case, I've been an off and on meditator over the course of my life. And it's motivating. It's like I feel motivated to use this. So it's having that good effect for me.
That's fantastic. And that's actually a metaphor, the idea of training wheels that we use here too. So if you've never had a practice before, this really teaches you what to do. for all of us who either ourselves or our clients are like, what's meditation? How do I do it? This really shows you what you're supposed to do. And for those people who have an on again, off again practice, this is like, it's like training wheels, or it's like a coach holding your hand and being there with you to guide you and encourage you and give you reminders and feedback and motivation. We also now have a Muse community. So we have a Facebook group of thousands of people who you can share your data and experiences with, and they'll talk about their meditation, and everybody will talk about their meditation experience with or without Muse, and that really keeps you engaged and on the wagon meditating. So it's both, the training wheels and the thing that keeps you on the wagon.
Yeah, okay. And I should mention too that I discovered this a little late. Somehow I missed it in the beginning, is that there are different programs that you can select. And that one of them is Deepak Chopra. And, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And it made me wonder, I wonder if that's a direction. I was talking to a friend about the product, and he mentioned something like that. Well, are there other points of view or other, points of view or approaches to meditation? And so that could be a line extension for you guys. And I just wonder, do you plan to go more in that direction of, I think right now there was Deepak and there was two people from another meditation company, if we can say that.
Yeah, there's the Levies, who are an amazing Joel and Michelle Levy meditation teachers who are filled with heart, and Deepak. And yes, again, you hit it right on the nose. We actually just merged with another company called Meditation Studio that has a very popular app filled with 500 different meditations. And so soon you're going to be seeing their teachers bringing content into the Muse ecosystem. So we have the core experience where you can hear your mind during meditation and get the real-time feedback. And then we'll also have a range of different meditations for sleep, anxiety, stress, et cetera, to guide you and encourage you through your day with or without the Muse.
Oh, that'll be very interesting to see. So you're going to need to kind of tweak the algorithm, so to speak, for different kinds of experiences, right?
Yeah, you're going to see a range of new experiences coming out with Muse for the next while. Yeah.
Will there be any way to upgrade an existing Muse unit with a different algorithm?
So luckily, algorithms are all software experiences. So with the existing Muse, you'll be able to get new experiences too.
There'll be a way to download and get those into it. Okay.
Yeah, so Muse is really a platform for a range of different meditation experiences, with meditation in the self, meditation in the body, meditation in the mind.
Yeah, interesting. I think sleep is certainly a huge issue for many people, and to have a natural, a non-drug sleep aid would be very useful. Now,
one of the most common things I actually hear is that people sleep significantly better after they're musing. Yeah. And sometimes it'll happen where, in a couple, maybe the wife will buy a Muse and it'll sit by the bedside, and gradually she'll notice every night it's on the husband's side of the bed because he's using it to fall asleep every night.
Yeah. I've noticed that it feels like it's impacted my dreaming. And it's hard to describe that. I go to sleep easily. Anyway.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, really.
You're blessed
for that, right? And but I felt like there was a different kind of depthful experience in some of my dreams, where I felt there was some kind of underlying wisdom or conversations that I was having with dream figures. I felt a kind of dare I say, spiritual authority in my dream self in these dialogues. So
that is fascinating. I can't say in any way that that's from the Muse, but that's, certainly from your experience of using the Muse. So whether you felt like you were more spiritual and connected because of it, or had tapped into a new part of yourself now that you've achieved a daily practice, whatever it is, it's a beautiful experience to have.
Yeah, I felt so. I don't know if you've read Michael Pollan's book on psychedelics. How to Change Your Mind. Have you encountered that book?
I have not, but I know a lot of his body of work. What are
Yeah.
the ideas that resonated there with you?
Well, I've had a long-standing interest in altered states of consciousness. Generally,
Mhm.
my doctoral, some of my doctoral work was on that, and actually, my doctoral dissertation was on meditation. Believe it or not, back in 1970.
Oh, amazing. I want to hear more about that.
I have to remember. It's been so long ago. Um, I was studying the role of attention in
Hmm.
meditation and hypnosis. And of course, didn't have these tools. I didn't have any technological tools. So I had people in a soundproof chamber, uh, in one case following their breath, in another condition staring at a candle. And they were to, and I had a mechanical button hooked up to a counter in another room for them to press every time they had an intrusion or brought themselves back. I don't know for sure how robust a measure that was, kind of primitive, but I heard from one of my own graduate students who had visited Harvard, and he mentioned, and he was asking what they were doing, and they said, "Oh, we're using the Van Nuys technique." So somebody at Harvard was using it.
Wow.
I was pretty flattered, because I was fresh out of graduate school at that point. Um, so yeah, so I have a long-standing interest in this. Would you say that Muse leads to altered states of consciousness?
Uh, in that, so that's, certainly not a claim that we make. And it's certainly not validated by any research. And, as the scientist, I have to lay out all that groundwork. However, somebody who's beginning a meditation practice, or somebody has an interest in meditation and altered states, essentially what you're doing is learning how to manage your internal state of mind and access new parts of yourself. And the way that you do that is through mental training. The way that you do that is through changing the relationship between your thoughts. The way that you
Yeah,
do that is through being able to maintain your attention for significant periods of time.
right, right.
And, you know,
One of
generally
the
it's
things, yeah,
reported from monks and others that when you
yeah.
sit in silence with your own mind for long periods of time, these altered states begin to arise and the self begins to drop away. To get there takes a hell of a lot of training, and this is certainly one of the tools in the training kit.
Yeah, yeah. You asked me about Michael Pollan's book. This
Mm-hmm.
book is about psychedelics. I thought I was pretty knowledgeable about that, having come through the 60s and
Mm-hmm.
experimented a lot with psychedelics. Somehow still made it through through a graduate education. And so I thought I knew a lot about that, but I learned so much from his book because he came to it as somewhat of a skeptic, as an open-minded skeptic, but kind of admitted that basically he's a materialist and not especially spiritual and so on. So he came at it both intellectually, but then he ends up in the course of events deciding that he's got to get involved experientially with this, and he shares the experiences that he had, and he interviews many of the leading lights and movers and shakers around all of that, and there's a renaissance of research now
Yes.
that's happening around psychedelics, and he covers a lot of that. So one of the things that he talks about is some research that uh, by a Brit by the name of Robin Carhart Harris on the default mode network
Mm-hmm.
of the brain. And I had recently learned about that network from another neuroscience interview that I did. And this is just a hypothesis by Pollan and Carhart Harris, is that if we can quiet the default mode network, this is sort of the like when the car is idling and
Mm-hmm.
the brain is sort of in idling mode, it's not inactive, but in fact and I'm sure you know this, it's very active, a lot
Yeah.
of activity going on. But it may be that the speculation was that some of these psychedelic states of transcendence may involve a quieting of that network. And there's some sort of corollary evidence to suggest that that could be the case.
That's really interesting. Certainly with long-term meditators, you see a decrease in the default mode network. And that's work of Dr. Judson Brewer. You put an average individual inside an MRI machine and you see activation of the DFM. So that's the area between your frontal cortex and your PCC, posterior cingulate cortex. You see that network lit up significantly. And it correlates to this internal dialogue that we have, the voice that's always going on inside our heads.
Right.
And, sort of meditation mythos, we talk about the monkey mind and the chatter of the monkey mind. And it turns out that it's a real neurophysiological phenomenon. When you put a long-term meditator inside an MRI and tell them to just lie there and do nothing, they, A, don't have that monkey mind reported, the internal chatter, and B, you don't see activity, significant activity in their default mode network. It quiets down. So that's certainly a finding from standard meditation. I wonder if you put somebody on a, in psilocybin or any of the other psychoactives in an MRI, what their DFM is doing.
Well, that's going to be studied. It probably is being studied.
I'm sure somewhere in a lab right now.
Yeah, really. And it might be that one of the algorithms that you would develop would have something to do with that, with quieting that, or maybe that is what's happening now, and I'm not sure. And it's interesting that just this morning I was thinking about the monkey mind. I must have been thinking about this coming up. And I was thinking monkey mind, and I was thinking, well, that, we have these 3 different layers of the brain, if you will, and the monkey mind would maybe suggest a more archaic layer. So I thought that'd be interesting if, in the Far East, they somehow came up with this metaphor that in fact is an accurate description of our brain organization. So that's me going out on a limb.
That's, leads to the question, do monkeys have monkey mind? Do monkeys have chatter inside their DFM, default mode network? And I would guess the answer is no, because that internal chatter is a reflection of the self. It's the ego talking. It's the self. It's the internal voice that we hear. And as far as we know, lower primates don't have a sense of self and don't have an internal dialogue. Indeed, it requires language to have an internal dialogue. So will monkeys have a monkey mind? Probably not. Potentially.
I would.
That's one for the primate consciousness researchers to investigate.
They're swinging from the trees all the time, I figure their brain's going to be similar in that regard.
But do they have a self that is do they have a self that is constantly critiquing, dialoguing, planning, chattering in their own ears? That is
I don't know. We do have the gorillas and some of the other apes that have been taught sign language and have been shown to have some rudimentary sense of self. So there might be some champion primates out there that have this capability. So I meant to ask you, what plans do you have for Muse going forward? And you've already alluded to some of those directions. Are there any others that come to mind?
Sure. So we have a program that we use Muse with psychotherapists, psychiatrists, life coaches, and it's called Muse Connect. And that allows you to use it inside of your clinical practice. So in the past, I was a therapist for almost a decade, and I try to teach my patients and clients meditation. And typically you try to explain it, they go home, they don't necessarily do it, and then it becomes a somewhat frustrating loop. Now you can simply hand your patient to Muse or use the in session with them, explain the meditation process, actually have them hear and feel in real time what their mind is doing during meditation, and then prescribe the use of it regularly throughout the week. And you can actually track each of your clients and how their meditation is going. And when they come back, you can actually look at the data together with them and have an object for their experience that you can talk about together. You can actually look, say like, hey, what was your brain doing at that moment? How was your experience this day? What notes do you have alongside it? So it becomes this really tangible way to bring meditation into your clinical practice or coaching practice.
Yeah. Going back to the idea of controlling external reality with external things with the brain. There's been quite a bit of that actually by now. with for rehabilitation, right? With people who
Hmm.
lost function in their body, maybe people who are quadriplegics, the controlling of robotic limbs and robots themselves. There are certainly a lot of games in which that's one of the electronic video games in which that's one of the principles. Um, where do you think all of this is going to go?
So we're very early on in the stages of controlling stuff with our mind.
Yeah,
Actually, in our history of developing this, we tried all of those things. We made games that you control with your brain. We let people light up tall buildings with their mind, all of which showed us the fact that the most valuable thing that we can do with this technology now is help us turn the lens inside and use it to understand ourselves. Um, Ultimately, we are in a world of sensors, and sensors are going to get better and better at uh, understanding ourselves and our needs and supporting our interaction with technology. We're a long way off till we can effectively control something with our brain, like significantly a long way off.
yeah, yeah.
But in the time from now until then, we will have technology that is able to understand some aspects of ourselves or our emotional experience and then be able to reflect that back to us so that we can get better and better at making choices about our lives.
Um, One of the hats that I wear is that of a market researcher, and one of the developments that's happening now in the area of market research is the ability to kind of read what's going on in people's brains in response to advertising.
Mm-hmm.
That marketers are wanting to use these tools. And God, there was one I was reading about. Oh, there's somebody who gave a TED talk, as you gave a TED talk. There's a recent TED talk where the woman was presenting Poppy, somebody. Maybe you know who I'm referring to. Her first name, I think, was Poppy.
Okay, I don't know the TED Talk.
Um,
She just spoke at the last TED?
could be. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I didn't. I was at TED. I didn't see her talk though. But yeah.
Oh, they were able to make judgments about emotional arousal and involvement based on the air that our bodies, our breath is revealing of our emotional states, of our internal states. So that's one way. Pupil dilation is another way.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the pupil dilation and so on is one of the things that's being used in market research, where you'll be watching a video of an ad, and there are points where you're very absorbed, and that's highlighted, and they're doing heat maps, all kinds of things. What are your thoughts about that? I sometimes wonder about the ethics of all of that.
Yeah. So you got right to the heart of the matter. So for me, I am not in favor of using this for market research. I'm really not in favor of technology understanding people better so they can sell us crap that we don't need more efficiently. To me, that is not, supporting to the growth and flourishment of our human experience.
Yeah.
I am in favor of using this information insofar as it gives us better experiences about ourselves. So we're notoriously bad at really understanding our own emotional states. We're notoriously bad at noticing when we're slipping into depression. We're notoriously bad at knowing exactly what triggered the anger that we feel now. And so we blame the person in front of us as opposed to the actual experience. And so using technology as a mechanism to heighten and highlight those aspects of ourselves and interactions with the world that are meaningful to us, that allow us to understand ourselves better and make better decisions about ourselves, to me is really key. And to do that, we need technology that is focused on enhancing ourselves as humans, not simply trying to take up space in the marketplace or sell us stuff. But it
Well,
takes
yeah, well said. I think too, I'm suspicious of I think people will make claims
uh-huh.
for the efficacy of, for selling products and so on, that I think are not necessarily supported by the science. It's sort of like the Wizard of Oz. We've got
Yes.
flashing lights and
We've got
interesting
we've
sounds.
got flashing the lights and we'd like to raise some money. It can do this. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why
yeah,
we're extremely cautious about what we say it can do. Can it help you achieve altered states? I don't know. We haven't done the research study on that.
yeah,
When we have,
yeah,
I'll let you know. It has been correlated with this or that, however.
yeah.
Um, So I think it's
You,
key.
you do market it as helping concentration, and
Yep.
has there, and I know there was some work with kids who have ADD. Uh, is there any sort of more generalized research about its usefulness for somebody who, for students who study, for example?
So meditation overall, so Muse is something that helps you meditate, and that has been clearly demonstrated through research studies. Meditation overall is something that has been demonstrated many, many times over to help improve your attention and decrease your stress, to help kids study for the GREs, and on and on.
Mhm.
Um, to improve your productivity at work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With Muse and students, we specifically have one study that from Kansas State University, and it looked at grade 8 students, not their concentration, but their behavior. And it showed that kids who meditated with Muse showed a 72% decrease in being sent to the principal's office. Yeah, so that was a beautiful study.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I also thought about the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch has made, and I've got one. The Apple Watch, they're doing research that it's not fully realized yet in terms of monitoring physiological states that that have bearing on our health. And so, what do you think about that? And is there a way in which the Apple Watch could work in concert with the Muse, do you think?
Sure. An Apple Watch gives you your heart rate, and HRV is a really meaningful way to understand your level of stress and your ability to relax your body. So, adding an HRV experience, um, having your smartphone disappear and doing your Muse session directly on your Apple Watch. And we're going to see more and more convergence of sensors. And as we get better at converging sensors and data and having a better picture of what happens to our bodies and all of these different experiences, what our physiology is like during experience, we can get better and better at using that information to help us.
What in neuroscience and this sort of range that we've been talking about in terms of monitoring the inner states and all, what's on the horizon that has you excited? What are you excited about these days?
Oh, that's my foot's falling asleep. I'm excited. My foot is slightly asleep. 1 second. Sorry. So there's a lot of exciting things happening in neuroscience. One is smaller and smaller sensors. And so they have even, out of UC San Diego, tattoo-like sensors on your forehead. The ability to actually map the connectome. It's going to be a long time coming, but the map of every connection in the brain and what it could mean is extraordinarily exciting. We have only very rudimentary maps of the brain, and we have an idea of what happens, in each area, but each area is responsible for so many different functions, and everybody's brain is uniquely different. And so, the ability to build better and better maps and then have that data be meaningful in some way. So things like taking an MRI and then being able to layer on top of it EEG real-time data so that you can both see what's happening in the structure and then what's happening in the electrical connections at any moment in time, is going to give us more and more precise ideas about how the brain works during a range of different activities. And actually, friends of mine, Tim Mullen and his crew, built something called the glass brain, which already they take a DTI, so DTI is diffusion tensor imaging. It's an MRI with another layer on it that lets you look at the tractography, the connections, the tracks in your brain, and then they layer on it real-time EEG, and then they put it in a VR environment, and so you can literally fly through somebody's brain in VR, watching the electrical interactions through their physiological structure and connections. So they don't have a lot of meaning associated with it. Right now, it's a methodology that looks cool. Over time, we're going to have better and better resolution to understand what's happening moment by moment in the brain using technologies like that.
Do you see any VR in the future of Muse that would help to, I don't know, in a way that's sort of taking one out of one's inner world, right? And so maybe it's
So we do actually have a lot of people who use Muse with VR simultaneously. So as it is, you can slip on a Muse headband with an Oculus VR or a Samsung Gear. And we've even made a faceplate that allows you to readily do that. So in the existing Muse experience, you're feeling like you're inside your own head when you hear it in your own mind. But there's a lot of interest in people who want to do therapy in virtual worlds, who want to do PTSD therapy and have a visual virtual world experience in real time with your EEG. So that's something that we've collaborated with others on and have our own technology here to do as well.
Yeah, okay. Artificial intelligence is another exciting area and also a buzzword. I think there are going to be more and more products out there like toothpaste, with new X47 added. And I think there are going to be a lot of claims for artificial intelligence. We have artificial intelligence stirred in with deep learning.
Yeah.
Do you see artificial intelligence? Is AI employed in the development of this product, your product, or?
Absolutely. So we've been using deep learning, actual deep learning, for years now. We came out of a tradition out of the University of Toronto that was started by Jeff Hinton, who's the guy who invented the term deep learning. So we're just lucky to have been in this physical space with the inventors of that AI methodology. So for us, we look at millions and millions of sessions of EEG data and have to pull meaning out of that vast amount of noise and then use that meaning to reproduce an experience in somebody else, to understand if they're focused or if their mind is wandering. And then to, over time, bring in other sensor data. So, AI is key to what we do. And that's, maybe it becomes safer. AI can sound scary. Machine learning is also basically a corollary phrase for AI. There's the joke in Silicon Valley. It's AI when you're pitching for money and machine learning when you're hiring talent. So machine learning helps you understand from these vast data sets what's actually going on with these, complex ideas with more data than any human being could possibly understand at once, and to simplify it down to really simple experiences.
Yeah.
But it requires a human. It requires many humans in the loop to interpret it and really make it meaningful and useful.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we've sort of done it. Is there anything more that you would like our listeners and viewers to know?
Well, if you want, we can delve more into what happens in the brain during meditation. You can ask me anything about meditation.
No.
Okay. All right. We don't need to know about more brains. Perfect.
Yeah. Well, so I take it you are a meditator?
Of course.
Meditator? And do you still use the Muse or not?
Absolutely.
Really?
You can't not use the Muse. For me, it's not something I use all the time. Meditation, once you become a long-term meditator, meditation becomes something that happens throughout the course of your day. So meditation is the training, mindfulness is the skill that is built through meditation, and mindfulness is hopefully something that you bring into every moment of your life thereafter. But I use Muse as a regular practice, as a thing that helps me maintain my meditation. And I'll do other forms of meditation throughout the day, but using regularly is always what I come back to.
Okay. Well, Ariel Garten, I really want to thank you for sharing so much with us today. And it's been great speaking with you.
My absolute pleasure. Awesome to hear from you, to learn more about your background and your experience, and to be able to share with everybody else.
Okay. Well, thanks for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks for having me.